Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today on key performance indicators. My name is Mary Beth McCucci, and I am the Director of Member Learning at NAFA. Before I turn things over to our moderator and speakers, just a very few quick housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded, and a copy will be made available to you. And we also have you muted during this presentation to avoid background noise. But please know we do encourage questions and comments, and you can put those in the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom bar. If you just hover over it, you'll be able to see that pop up. If you have any technical difficulties, please reach out to me directly. You can chat with me, and we'll make sure we can get that resolved for you. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's session, Shelley Parker. Shelley, please go ahead and begin.
Thank you, Mary Beth. As she said, I'm Shelley Parker. I'm a senior project manager with the transportation team at NC Clean Energy Technology Center hosted at NC State University. The center provides services to public entities, governments, municipalities, businesses, utilities, and directly to citizens related to developing and adopting clean energy technologies, including those in the transportation sector. Through its programs and activities, we envision and seek to promote the development and use of clean energy in ways that stimulate a sustainable economy. We're proud to partner with NAFA, the world's largest membership association for individuals who manage vehicular fleets and mobility responsibilities, to expand access to this webinar series. We have some great panelists today to talk about key performance indicators, or KPIs, so thank you all for tuning in. I have a passion for service, and this should be a great webinar to introduce you to review KPIs and how they contribute to the triple bottom line, resulting in more sustainable outcomes, or as much as we can cover in 90 minutes. I'd like to thank our sponsors for making these webinars possible. The NC Clean Energy Tech Center collaborates with NAFA to produce the webinars, and it would not be possible without the support of our sponsors. We require assistance in closing the gap between our funding sources and the programming we provide. We do this through Fee for Work service, the Sustainable Fleet Technology Conference and Expo, and through the sponsors of this webinar series. Our sponsor partnerships are vital to contributing and continuing to provide educational opportunities. We truly appreciate the financial support these organizations provide, many with longstanding partnerships. They're strong companies, so I would like to recognize Geotab, which you'll be learning more from in a few minutes, Pioneer eMobility, which provides off-grid EV charging, power, and connectivity with mobility. It doesn't require on-site construction or electrical upgrades. Leke Services, which focuses on helping companies accelerate the transition of mobility to clean energy, and U.S. Soy and the United Soybean Board, working toward better, cleaner, and safer ways that help us and our environment. The U.S. Soy helps to make a better world possible, including alternative fuel options and soy-based bioproducts that can assist in greening your garage. We hope you learn more about their solutions and you hear from them throughout the webinar series over the course of the year. We are currently wrapping up the SFT webinar series for 2024. There is another session on December 4th focusing on off-road electrical equipment, and I hope you'll register for that if your fleet uses or is considering sustainable technologies in off-road equipment, and you can pass the link along to others as well. Registration is already open. The webinars are informative sessions with industry experts and analyze frequent challenges, demonstrating the areas of potential operational improvement. So I hope that you will look forward to that. All of our previous webinars are available on demand, and this one should be posted within the week. And with that, we have a few save the dates. I love NAFA I&E when I attended last spring, and I'll hand it over to Mary Beth to give a little bit of an overview.
Thank you so much, Shelley. Yes, we're thrilled to have our NAFA I&E once again in 2025. This will be April 28th through the 30th, and we would welcome your participation. One of the new things that we're having this year is an indoor ride and drive in our exhibit hall. So we're very thrilled to announce that. And we are looking forward to sharing all of the education. We have well over 50 sessions, including our keynotes, certainly in our exhibit floor, which will be have expanded hours this year. So please feel free to scan the code, or if need be, you can always go to nafa.org. Thank you, Shelley.
Thank you. Hopefully I will have the opportunity to see some of our attendees there. Another conference that I want to highlight is the Sustainable Fleet Technology Conference. The QR code over on the left hand of your screen will allow you to sign up to get updates when registration opens, as well as when sponsorship and exhibitor opportunities are available. We did sell out last year, and the early bird registration is only $349. So it's a great conference that's very affordable for many of our fleets in the Southeast region and the Eastern Seaboard. We'll be in Winston-Salem this year, August 25th through 27th, and I hope you'll join your colleagues from across the US. I'd like to encourage you to sign up so that you know when the early bird is coming. The SFT conference has 12 breakout sessions and a combination of 4 plenaries and keynotes. It is also where NAFA will present their Green Fleet Awards. So I encourage you to keep an eye out for those applications in the spring as well. And I hope you've saved some continuing education funds in order to join us there. The SFT conference, in addition to speakers, has a great expo hall with service providers and exhibitors. We have vehicle displays across various fuel types, as well as sustainable technology features. There are multiple networking events for you to catch up with your colleagues and make connections to new peer fleets. As a regional conference, it's the perfect size to have time for deep dive discussions with other attendees and with potential vendors. And with that, I would like for us to officially kick off the webinar. Let's begin with a focus on key performance indicators. What are they? How do you choose them, measure them, grow them, evolve them as you develop a positive triple bottom line, which is beneficial for the people, the community stakeholders, your employees, your advocates, and your allies, the planet for offsetting environmental impacts from emissions, increasing longevity of assets, and reducing pollution through maximum efficiency, and profit, which I know can be a dirty word in the realm of government. So for you, that means financial responsibility and serving as a good steward of public funds, tax dollars, and grants, finding a way to maximize your existing budget to go further, potentially to have more competitive wages, more training, or retention pay if you're in that public sector. And you can use KPIs and dashboards as a great way to tell your story. And with that, I'm going to introduce Megan Allen, who is with Geotab, one of our sponsors, and who specializes in this type of work. Megan?
Thanks, Shelley. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here and talk a little bit about KPIs to approach sustainability goals. If we move on to the next slide, I can explain a little bit more about Geotab and really where we come from when we think about fleet KPIs. So Geotab is a platform, and within that platform, it starts with data collection. And that is, we can get data off of the vehicles from either a device that's installed in the vehicle, from asset trackers, cameras, cloud-to-cloud connection. So there's a lot of information that we can take in. And I think all of this information is really helpful and important because we can start to use that information to analyze. And from that analysis and really cleaning and making sure that we're doing good things with the data, we can start to develop insights, and those insights can move us towards actions. So I think if we move through this slide, it should be able to show us that. So we are really making sure that we're getting data off of as much as we possibly can, but then making meaning from it. I think all of us have been swimming in data for years. And what we really want to do is be able to take data, make it standardized so that we can get an understanding of where we are today. And then with that understanding, figure out where we need to go next. This is something that I've had just managing my own team. It's very difficult to set goals for the next year, or very difficult to understand what we can do when we don't yet know where we are. And so what we try to do at Geotab is take all of the different data that you could gather from a telematics device, whether that is maintenance related data, some diagnostic fault codes, safety related data to see risks of incidents, and really put it together in a way that makes it meaningful for fleets to be able to set better goals. So we can go to the next slide and see some examples of what that looks like. So, I'm not going to step through everything that's here, but really we can look at all of these different facets of fleet operation. And I find that within sustainability, we're actually operating in a number of different areas. To operate a sustainable fleet is also to operate a well-maintained fleet. And when we think about asset utilization, in sustainability, we would really want to focus on, let's say, increasing EV utilization. But that also goes hand in hand with reducing the overall fleet operating costs, right? Most of the time, any distance traveled on an electric vehicle is significantly less costly than the distance traveled on a conventional vehicle in the same area. And so we want to make sure that vehicles are being used in their right applications. We want to make sure they're being routed properly. And so with all of that, that's really where this data comes into play, and making meaning from the data in terms of insights. We can move on to the next slide to see some of the other areas in which Geotab focuses. To look at vehicle utilization. And we'll start to see some sustainability themes in here, looking at idling fuel and fuel costs overall, and really fleet benchmarking. So one of the things for Geotab is that we're on over 4 million vehicles worldwide. And from there, we can be able to see trends in specific vehicle make and models, trends in specific segments, so that we can create additional meaning on top of just the data that you're getting from your vehicle. We focus on sustainability. Moving on to the next slide, we can see some key questions and some key KPIs or areas that fleets are looking towards. So how can we make sure that with the information we have that we're investing in the right steps? So there are so many options available in terms of how fleets can operate more sustainably, but we want to make sure that we are making the investments in the right places. How to set achievable goals. I think a lot of the times fleets are viewed as an area within an organization that can make the biggest difference in terms of an organization's overall carbon reduction goal, but that doesn't mean that they're given the tools to accomplish that. And then when fleets are electrifying, how do you make sure that those investments are paying off? How can you tell that story? And how do you set KPIs for those EVs to get utilized and start to realize that return on investment? So I have a couple ways that Geotab does this that I want to just highlight today, just because they're really interesting to me. So on the next slide, we will see looking at idling and driver behavior indicators. This is something that, when we've talked to fleets, has bubbled up to the top in terms of how they're trying to reduce emissions. One of the things that we've worked on lately is to create a sustainability center, a place where you can see overall trends for fuel and emissions, but then also have proactively opportunities to reduce those emissions highlighted up. These are the kinds of insights that can lead to better goal setting, where you can say, I can set a goal to reduce idling because my fleet idles in a way that is sufficient. But if you're a fleet that's already operating in such a way that idling isn't a problem for you, you probably shouldn't be focusing on that. You're going to get diminishing returns from those efforts. If we move on to the next slide, we can start to see questions around electrification. So this is something else that comes up a lot with fleets that we're working with. How do they make sure that they're electrifying in the right way? And making sure that vehicles that they're considering have the range necessary to do the job, that they have a reduced total cost of ownership, and that they have sufficient time to charge overnight. So there's lots of unknowns in terms of new technology coming to market. And I think that it's a lot of questions to have to solve. What we're hoping to do within Geotab is to be able to provide the data and the insights that you would need to get to a point where you can answer those questions, where you are informed, and you're not just informed based upon what might be your own research, but informed because of a history and big data and benchmarking for fleets that have been electrifying over the last decade. And the last area that I'd like to focus on the next slide is just what we can do with this in terms of human conversations. So I think, KPIs can sometimes seem lofty and maybe not really talking down to an individual. one of the things that we like to focus on is the driver and the driver's experience. And so what this looks like for us is presenting data in context. In this specific example, we know when fleets are electrifying that drivers worry about not having the range needed to do the job, that they would be left running out of range. And so one of the things that we added to the EVSA was to look at a month-by-month assessment of the longest driving distance that fleet did in that month, and then also a worst case scenario based upon the temperature, based upon the weather conditions for what we forecasted those EVs would do in those months. And would they need to charge on the road? Maybe. And if they don't have an appetite for it, that's okay. But what this is really here to do is to facilitate a conversation, to take something from a KPI down to something where it's manageable, it's human, and you're actually able to manage that change. So to quickly wrap up in terms of at least how at Geotab we really view insights and vehicle data, it is to enable fleets to set achievable targets, not to just have a target that's very difficult to hit, but to know the pathway to hit it and to predict the impact of programs and measures. Instead of having to think, I hope I can do this and then I'll evaluate the success after the fact. If you can make an informed decision about where to invest, it can help. And then measuring the impact and reporting on the success. I think that's something that's always been consistent, is to be able to look back and say, with the goal we set, how could we accomplish it?
Excellent. Thank you so much, Megan. I appreciate your insight there and all of the work that Geotab does with the fleets across the US. We have a great group of panelists here today. We have Kelly Regan, the fleet administrator from the city of Columbus, Ohio. We have Tara Spencer from Move EV, and we have Rick Longabart from the city of Raleigh and VP of Longabart Ross Full Fleet Solutions. It seems like we may have lost our first speaker. So if you will bear with me, I think we're going to go ahead. Rick, if you're able to jump in, we will go to you first. And give me a moment to catch up. So, Rick, as I mentioned, is the Fleet Operations Manager for the City of Raleigh, North Carolina, and VP and Principal of Longabart Ross Full Fleet Solutions. He has been active in the fleet industry for more than 40 years, working with 4 different government agencies. He's currently the Fleet Operations Manager for the City of Raleigh, where I live, so I appreciate all of the work that you do there. And the Vehicle Fleet Services was recognized as the #1 large fleet and overall #1 fleet in the nation in 2023 and named the Elite Fleet in 2024. Mr. Longabart is co-founder of Longabart Ross Consulting, Profit Software and EV Seamless Transition Group, where he keeps and helps fleets across the nation, including Canada, become more efficient, effective, and productive organizations and transitions to electrification and energy transportation. And Geotab and the city of Raleigh actually have a case study that they have done previously. So we're going to go ahead and run that before we kick off because it gives a very succinct overview.
The city has 4,700 vehicles, from turf equipment all the way up to fire engines and in between. It's a very diverse, complex fleet. It supports a full-service city, meaning we do everything from street sweeping to fire, safety, rescue. Everything we touch, everything we do is all around sustainability, whether it's looking at renewable propane, looking at compressed natural gas, electrifying our fleet, to retread tires. Everything we touch and everything we do has a relationship to sustainability. And we treat Geotab that same way. We look at Geotab to determine utilization of how our vehicles are used and whether or not they need to be in the fleet. We look at anti-idling, how often the vehicle idles.
Changing driver behavior with anti-idling was mostly focused around debunking myths that a lot of drivers had about their vehicle, as in how much time it may take for a vehicle to warm up, or if they need to have the battery running for certain lights to run.
We use Geotab to score our driving behavior from harsh braking, heavy acceleration, seat belt engagement, speed control.
When we looked at the inputs for driver safety, we realized that we had a global score of 40.5. That's very low. And so the first goal that we set was we wanted to get to a global score of 75 within 6 months. In 3 months, we reached 80.5, I believe. So we doubled the score essentially in 3 months. We reduced our repair costs for vehicles. We reduced our at-fault motor vehicle accidents. We reduced our workers' comp incurred costs. All of our departments working together, being engaged, understanding the importance of Geotab not being a big brother, but a partner, and to making sure that we are doing what we need to do to be as safe as possible at work.
When we request funds from either department heads or from city council, we want to make sure that we are approaching them with information to back up our request. This information we can derive directly from Geotab, and with that we can show them, even though something may seem more expensive upfront, down the road it could be able to save us X amount or reduce emissions by a certain amount.
So our relationship with Geotab is a wonderful partnership. As we've looked at various solutions for different things, a good example would be an electronic pre-trip solution. We're looking at various options and we reach out to Geotab and they have that. It's built into the system that we're currently using. We also use remote diagnostics to kind of triage remotely, if you will, if we need to have the vehicle towed in or if the vehicle is safe to operate. So we can do that remotely without having to pull a truck off the route and save money with those tows.
Geotab is simple, it's in-depth, it's plug-in, and it allows us to have in-depth reports that give us data to further driver decisions.
Geotab has a lot of features that make data sharing super simple and hands-off. I can create a report for a department, I can set it up in Geotab, say how often I want it to be sent, and it's gone and done, and I don't even have to think about it anymore until the department head may want me to change something or make any tweaks. But even then, the platform is super user-friendly. Blue Arrow has been the catalyst that has helped us and pulled us to where we are now. People look for us for benchmarking, and when they look at us and are asking how we retrieve data, who's helping us, what resources do we have, we can point them right to Geotab and Blue Arrow.
All the technology in the world doesn't do us any good unless we have a partner that can help us understand how we can be a better operation. Blue Arrow brings that to us.
If you're looking to answer questions about your fleet, there's not a better way to go about it. You have live, real-time data about your drivers, the vehicles, the costs associated with them. It really helps you leverage data in a meaningful way. The data that we're pulling in from vehicles is becoming more and more robust. It's actually driving the industry in entirely new and unique directions in the current era that we're living in of fleet maintenance.
All right, Rick, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you very much, Shelley. Appreciate it very much. And let me say to NC Sustainability Center and to NAFA and our sponsors, thank you very much for having us. It's a pleasure and honor to be here today. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. And to Megan's point, let me start off because she kind of shorted up to my first slide in talking about telemetry and what Geotab and other type of similar technologies bring to the table. Right. For those of my listening audience, I'm probably maybe the oldest one on the call. So I like to explain how I view telemetry to a similar type of environment in the cell phone, smartphone world, right? If you recall, if you're old enough to know, there was a time when you had to justify to have a cell phone or a smartphone within your organization or company, and you'd oftentimes be questioned, why do I need a cell phone? What am I going to do with it? How am I going to use it? And then all of a sudden the world had cell phones in their hands, right? And smartphones. And we started to realize as we started to use that technology that how did we ever survive without it, right? How did we ever do our job without a means of communication? And I kind of viewed telemetry as that same way, right? Is how did we ever survive without telematics in the workplace on our vehicles? Because in the olden days, it was more of where's my driver and how fast were they going? And that's anything but the truth today. We use telemetry for so many variety of reasons, as Megan described, that really that data allows us to analyze and make decisions through technology where we could not do that before, right? From the bullets in which you see on your screen, from EV transition to route optimization to asset inspections, take-home vehicles, maintenance diagnostics, asset dispatching, fleet management integration, camera integrations. These are just a few, and we do many others where we integrate that telemetry data into our fleet management information system, where we can make intelligent data-driven decisions, where we could never have done that before. And it's no longer where is that vehicle and how fast is it going. It's really about advancing and finding ways to make that technology more sustainable in our fleet. And we're going to show a couple examples of what KPIs we're currently looking at and how we got there. And if you don't mind, next slide, please. So some of the ways that we look at our KPIs, and I'm going to say this repeatedly a couple times throughout this presentation. And if there's anything that you take away from this presentation, and that is, I'm going to stress this a little bit, is that from a fleet perspective, you cannot do this in a silo anymore. You know, in the past, you could probably launch a couple different technologies, whether it's a fuel management system or a fleet management information system, or a variety of different technologies where you could literally launch it in a silo. But with telemetry, it's so broad that you need partners throughout your organization to help you support and drive that technology. For example, right, when we look at telemetry, we constantly collaborate with our sustainability department. We're constantly collaborating with our HR. We're constantly collaborating with risk management. We're constantly collaborating with our partnerships within the stakeholders that are actually the end users, right? And when we talk about transitioning our fleet, you cannot do this alone in a silo. You've got to bring in your facility folks. You've got to bring in your IT folks. You've got to collaborate with your utility users, because you cannot do this alone. And the more partners you have, and the better you launch a program, the more successful you are. And so we have been incredibly successful in partnering rather than doing it in a vacuum, right? So our EV transition, in transitioning our fleet of 4,700 vehicles, in which we're targeting, and I'll share a little bit more in the next couple of slides, of transitioning 2,100 vehicles to electrification, is just evidence of where we're currently at and how our vehicles are currently being used, right? When we look at take-home vehicles, how are those vehicles being taken home, and how are they being charged, right? We're heavily looking at and moving towards Move EV to determine how do we reimburse employees when they charge at home. How do we reimburse those? And should it be a flat fee, or should it be a stipend, or should we only be charging them for the energy that they're actually using, because they are paying taxes on reimbursement? So it has to be accurate. So there's a variety of ways that we look at and measure how vehicles are currently being used. And Megan hit on this as well, right? Idle reduction is a major area where we look at how are our vehicles being used. I'm ashamed to say that we have some vehicles that idle more than they drive. And rightfully so. There are some vehicles that do have to idle more than they drive because they're unique pieces of equipment. However, there's a lot of vehicles that truly don't need to idle. And there's a huge amount of savings in idle reduction. We did a very comprehensive study, and we realized that we can save $8 million a year if we just reduce idling by 50%. $8 million in fuel. I mean, that's a big number. And our CO2s was somewhere around 300 carbon tons of emissions. That is a big number. So we're constantly measuring the amount of idle through telemetry and looking at day-to-day idling in vehicles. And that results into greenhouse gas emissions. In addition to that, fuel consumption, right? Fuel is volatile. So if we can reduce the amount of idling, That means obviously vehicles are going to last longer. That means less fuel consumption, less greenhouse gases, and our vehicles are going to last longer and less maintenance needs to be contributed to obviously those vehicles. And then utilization. Are those vehicles being utilized? And telemetry is a perfect example of how we measure whether those vehicles are being utilized properly and how they're being used. And then the last bullet is our driver scorecard, right? Is that we don't always think of driving behavior characteristics as a sustainability effort, but it truly is. If you think about how a vehicle is being used on a day-to-day basis, whether it's harsh stopping, heavy acceleration, those vehicles are consuming more fuel when they're driven in a more in a less sustainable environment. So we look at how those vehicles are being operable. And then if a vehicle gets in an accident, especially if it's a vehicle that has hydraulics, oil spills are a sustainability issue, right? When they go into the storm drains, we like to make sure that we're doing everything we can to coach our drivers to avoid mishaps, let alone liability and workman's comp issue, as you saw on the video. Next slide, please. So what we do on a regular basis, this goes out on a monthly to all of our departments, is we have an automated process through GeoTab that we send out a monthly scorecard, and every department gets something similar to what you see on your screen. And as you saw on the video, we started out at a very low score. We were in the 40 percentile, meaning the lower the number, the more horrific, where drivers were either accelerating, driving too fast, seatbelt not engagement, in risk situations. And that meant that vehicles were consuming more fuel and obviously posing more risk to the city of Raleigh. Today, our scores are in the 80 percentile, if not the 90 percentile. And we think that has a sustainable effort in our goals as well. Next slide, please. In another area which we look at as well, right? What's the best way of reducing emissions, greenhouse gases, and fuel consumption? And that is reducing and right-sizing your fleet. And so we look at motor pool car sharing as a way of advancing our sustainability efforts, but we also realize it's got to be a convenient way of an employee accessing a motor pool vehicle. The days of having someone behind a counter and a key and a hook, or a key box, and trying to go to a key box and getting the key out of the key controller and going to the vehicle is kind of old school technology. So in the last year and a half or so, we've launched a fully automated keyless motor pool Bluetooth technology. And the way that system works is very similar, and I hate to compare the two, but if you think of your scooter technology, where you might have a scooter throughout your community, and you take your smartphone and you download an app, and you're able to enable the scooter through the phone, authorize the charge through either a credit card or a credit card on your phone, and then the vehicle or the scooter is enabled. But we've kind of launched that same similar technology where we can now share those vehicles without single owner occupancy. That means we have less fleet vehicles in the fleet. And in addition to that, it's also a great way to encourage and foster EV transition, because most of our vehicles are electric in our motor pool. And the way that it works is a simple reservation. The user has an app, they download it on their cell phone or any web-enabled device for that matter. They simply make a reservation, they walk up to the vehicle, the door unlocks through the app, the key is in the vehicle, they never touch a key and they never need a key. The push start ignition will only enable the vehicle when it sees the reservation, hence meaning that if anyone were to break into the vehicle, that vehicle will not start unless it sees that reservation. When they get to their destination, they can lock the vehicle through the app, and they can unlock the vehicle through the app. When they complete their reservation, they simply lock the door, end the reservation by pushing a button on their web-enabled device, and then the reservation is ended, and now that vehicle becomes available again. The nice thing about this is you don't need to tether the car to a keyboard, or you don't need to tether it to a box. That vehicle can be dropped off in any destination. And so it doesn't always have to go back to the place where it was picked up. And we think that's a great way, as we get into EV transition, that we can expose those opportunities to those end users that do not have an EV vehicle in their fleet to give them an opportunity to drive it and encourage them to embrace that further technology. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit outdated. I profusely apologize for that, and we're updating some of our data now. We don't believe that there's a sole silver bullet fuel technology in our fleet, so we like to look at a variety of fuels as to how they best fit within our organization. And while we have a big presence in the EV electrification movement, we have a variety of fuels, and some of them have even advanced from this slide where you see 33 propane vehicles. Now that is actually in the hundreds, and actually that is now renewable propane, meaning that it is plant-based vegetable oil. Propane is not your conventional petroleum base. We also run compressed natural gas. We have hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, biofuel, ethanol, and we're also proud to say we are the first state in the South to have adopted renewable diesel. So now all of our diesel fuel is a plant-based vegetable oil and not a petroleum base. So we're constantly looking at how we can advance the sustainable movement, and certainly electrification is a big part of it. Please, next slide. And so we're constantly measuring where we're at. And you can see this is in 2023 in our previous slide. And we're starting to now populate our movement in our 2024. And you can start to see as each year passes, we progress and we have more alternative versus conventional fuel vehicles in our fleet. And at the end of the day, we want all of our bars to be greener and taller, and we want to continually advance the movement. So we're constantly looking to see that we're advancing the cause to our fleet. Next slide, please. This is probably our biggest, nearest, dearest to our hearts, right? Is EV implementation strategy rollout, which we now have coined the phrase e-visor from our talented staff, because EV implementation strategy rollout is a big pill and big word to swallow. So we refer to it as e-visor. So in 2022, we did a very comprehensive study of how we were going to roll out our EV implementation strategy. We knew that we needed a document that spelled out step by step of how we were going to accomplish that. And again, this is something that we know we cannot do from a fleet perspective. We need all of our stakeholders, and we need support from city administration to move the needle, and we can't do this alone. So we have stakeholders that help us drive from sustainability to human resources to planning and development to how we're going to launch a EV implementation strategy rollout. We have close to 70 vehicles in our fleet that are electrification. We'll share a little bit more about current EV charging, behind the fence, and public facing as well. I'm not going to bore you with the Gantt chart, but you can see some of the things in which we've measured, right, through telemetry. And this is how there's a nexus, because you've got to know where the dwell cycles are with each vehicle. You need to know how often they travel. You need to know how often they need to be charged. And we did that through our strategy, through very extensive analysis, from project management to what vehicles are candidates for electrification, to recommendation of sustainability of EV infrastructure that's required. We're looking at 500 dual port level 2 DC fast chargers, which will also be 50 DC fast chargers throughout the community. We're going to do some public sharing, both behind the fence and EV charging. We also recognize the fact that not every vehicle needs to be charged at the workplace, and that there'll be some home charging as well. And I think that's where the Move EV will help us strategize as to where we can then reimburse those employees where there's home charging at the home place versus the workplace. And then where there needs to be additional charging, we're also encouraging third-party charging as well. But there also has to be a strategy as to how we procure these vehicles, when we procure these vehicles, and where the incremental dollars are, because we do recognize that ICE vehicles are going to be a little bit less than the EV vehicle. And so we work with budget, right, to help how we're going to strategize to do that. But there also needs to be some training in place, right? There has to be training for not only behind the wheel, but there also needs to be training for underneath the hood. So in our EV strategy, we've looked at how we're going to do that, and we've created videos that we're launching for behind the wheel, and we're also working with our community technology centers to help us better understand how we need to be prepared to start training and managing those vehicles. So that's a little bit about our strategy rollout. We're very fortunate. It's a timely issue, and this is where we always look at how telemetry and technology can help us move that needle. And so one of the things that I constantly communicate when doing presentations and talking to other organizations that are moving towards the electrification space is that you've got to be able to measure EV vehicles and how they're being used. So we look at electric vehicles as much like a commodity of gasoline, right, or diesel, or whatever gaseous fuels you're currently using. Is that you've got to be able to measure. You can't manage what you can't measure. And so we look at electrification as a way of how much did it cost, which vehicle received how much kilowatt hours, when do they charge, how much do they charge, how often do they charge, because we need to be able to measure that in order to make advancements. And we also need to be able to pay the bill, right? And the bill's paid for through our stakeholders, just like gasoline is and conventional vehicles. So we're fortunate to have a brand new fuel management EV enterprise solution that can measure each and every vehicle that charges and which vehicle charges. And we do that, ironically enough, through GeoTab. And so our new fuel management system, anytime a vehicle gets to a fuel site or gets to an EV site, that nozzle goes into the filler neck of the vehicle, currently with gasoline, and it can then measure which vehicle received the fuel and the meter reading on the vehicle without having to go to a terminal and do a fat finger and entering that database. It gets it directly right through the software, which is very unique. And we're fortunate to have that. And then the same software can help us manage through public facing as well, so that we can advance our cause to charge. Next slide, please. And this is our mapping tool. I think I'm running out of time, so I'll go real fast. This is how we know what and where our chargers are at. There's 38 chargers currently in the city. There's 56 ports, and this is an example of a partnership with our IT and GIS department. So we know where all our chargers are at. As you hover your mouse over one of those buttons, you can see the chargers. You can see what type of charger it is. We've also advanced the cause. We know where employees are commuting from, so we know where to build chargers for take-home vehicles. We also know where our chargers are currently at and how they're currently being used. And this is a great way of knowing where comparison to third-party chargers are versus where city-owned chargers are. So we don't want to overlap when there could be one right next door. Why invest the money when there's already a third-party charger where we don't need to build an infrastructure where it can already be used through third-party charging? And I think that it might be my last slide. If you could advance to the next one. I think this is just an example. Again, I'm going to promote a little bit about stakeholder awareness, bring advancement to your organization. We do ribbon cutting. This is an example of our renewable propane site, our compressed natural gas, our EV solar array canopy. We constantly promote. We work with city manager's office sustainability. It's important to make sure that your stakeholders are aware of the advancements. And this is just one way that we share the wealth and making sure that our communities and our constituents within our community understands the advancement and our commitment to sustainability. Next slide, please. And I think it's already been noted, so I don't need to share this, but I think because of our efforts and our advance and progressiveness in our sustainability effort in 2023, we were named the #1 largest fleet and overall fleet in the nation. And in 2024, we were recognized as the elite fleet in 2024. We're really proud of our progress in sustainability efforts. And thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think the next one is my closing remarks, my contact information. Thank you very much, Shelley.
Thank you, Rick. We appreciate your time and preparation for this. And also, I wanted to let Joe and Patrick know I do have your questions. So as questions continue to come in, we will monitor them and get to them at the end. So with that said, I would like to take a moment to introduce Kelly Regan. Kelly's the fleet administrator for the city of Columbus, Ohio. He oversees a $44 million budget and 144 staff members, managing over 6,500 vehicles valued at $450 million. Since 2007, he's driven advancements in fleet efficiency and sustainability, including a $12 million annual light-duty buy plan. He works closely with the city's finance director and partnerships for alternative fuel initiatives with the local Smart Cities Coalition for Alternative Fuel Vehicles and Infrastructure. His success has garnered 9 Environmental Stewardship Awards, induction into the Fleet Managers Hall of Fame in 2015, and Fleet Manager of the Year in 2016. Under his leadership the same year, the Columbus Fleet was awarded #1 Leading Fleet of the Year by Government Fleet Magazine and was #1 in the Best 100 Green Fleets. He was a columnist for American City and County Magazine as well. Kelly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Shelley, for having me. And thank you, Mary Beth. He said he was the oldest on the panel. Rick, I'm the oldest, I think, on the panel. And so, in maybe even in the session. But that aside, I'd like to do just one or two things this morning. I don't want to reiterate all of the great information that Rick has already given you and Megan has given you, because Rick has had you all at about 250 feet above the surface. Now I'd like to take you about 60,000 feet, kind of where we keep auditors when they come in, and give you kind of a more global perspective on our idea and the way we view sustainability. Just as Rick said, there are lots of parts and pieces that go together to make a sustainability plan work. And the key is having a good, strong sustainability plan. So Megan mentioned this earlier. For those of you that might remember, we too run about 3,200 units with GPS, and data drives action. Action drives results, regardless of what you're doing from an efficiency and from a sustainability standpoint. So I want to talk just a minute this morning, and again, hang on, buckle up. I want to take you to 60,000 feet. So I want to talk to you about some of the things that we've been able to accomplish through our data-driven actions and our results for our entire fleet. We all know we need to do PM compliance, 48-hour turnaround, 24-hour turnaround, track PMs, and all of the other things. That's just part of the business. There's so much going on with this business. So again, buckle up. I want to take you to 60,000 feet. Megan said this earlier, and this is very important. Benchmarking. Benchmarking is very important, especially when you're doing all of the hard work of doing these things like Rick was talking about, that are very important and can be very expensive. So it's important to justify the cost and rationalize and deliver results. And remember, action delivers results. So we several years ago had an operational review pulled by the mayor's office from the city. 28 agencies were touched, and they came through my agency, and we simply handed them our benchmarking report and said, here it all is. This is where we need work. This is where we need help. And this is where we do a really good job. So after you read that, if you've got any questions, let us know. After about a week, they came in and sat down with me and said, you know what, this is really a great kind of a pro forma of what you're accomplishing here and what areas you do need to work on. And, we don't see you needing any changes here. Beautiful. While they were doing numerous reports for other agencies and changes they need to make. So benchmarking for us is mission critical. And I just wanted to spend a couple minutes to talk about a couple of these slides that I have that, again, really are at 60,000 feet. Mechanic cost per billable hour higher than the industry average. So this is one of our benchmarks with about 50 public entities. You say, well, Kelly, we're at 82.35 a billable hour for 2023 versus the industry average is 68.58. Geez, you're doing a pretty crappy job, aren't you? I mean, you're above the industry average in terms of costs. Well, no. we've made a focus on lifting the salaries of our technicians on the floor, because as many of us have struggled to hire people from the market, we just haven't been able to equalize pay. So one of our missions at Fleet was to do an in-depth 3-year analysis, and which many of the fleet managers out there helped me by providing their information. Chicago, Pittsburgh, LA, Long Beach, Sacramento, New York, cities across the U.S. to help us lift the hourly wage for our employees. So our hourly wage is about $20 over the industry average. And that's because we pushed to get it there. So my payroll last year was 1.5 million more than it was the previous year, with 120 wrenches on the floor. You say, why? Because we went to significantly higher pay rates. So this particular slide shows us that we're making progress in elevating, based on the industry averages, our technicians' pay. Now look at the piece to the slide, the slide to the right. Billable hours per mechanic below industry average. So the industry average is about 1,458 hours is what a mechanic bills. And we bill about 1,313. So what do we do to lift that up? Well, as many of you already know, if you're a public entity, you have an incredibly good, typically, PTO, or paid time off. You have generous PTOs. Depends on how you book your indirect and your direct time. And we have a ton of training. We have quite a bit of training that goes on in Columbus, so that all that impacts our billable hours per mechanic and lowers it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and these are some of the reasons I can show you why, if we'll bump up to the next slide, please. So when you look at our operational costs, and this is a 10-year analysis, and you look at our light duty costs, we monitor and we measure and benchmark our light duty costs, and what you really see is our costs this last year for 2023 were 24 cents a mile, versus the industry average of 31 cents a mile. And then when you look at the bottom portion of this, you see that we have 1,351 VEs per tech versus 1,295 VEs per tech. So let me give you a little hint. Higher VEs per tech is better than lower VEs per tech. In other words, my technicians are generating more work on more assets than the industry average. That's a good thing. So again, I've got you at 60,000 feet, and these are some of the things that we focus on. And remember, data delivers action, action delivers results and efficiencies. So if we can go to the next slide, please. One of the things we look at very closely, we too are big EV people, but first and foremost, we're gaseous people. That doesn't just mean that we have dinner and we have gas, but this means that we pump a lot of gas throughout the city, about 1.4 million GGEs a year out of 4 stations with $24 million invested in compressed natural gas. And that has really driven our sustainability program. And I'll show you in hard numbers how it's done that. But we get asked this question every year. Well, what are your sustainable efforts doing? I mean, what does it mean to have a BEV, or a battery electric vehicle, versus a PHEV? Or why would I run electric vehicles versus compressed natural gas vehicles? So we have this data coming to us, and when we look at this slide is purely EVs, nothing to do with our other sustainability efforts. But we just have been able to, through our data, being able to drive through and look at what our cost avoidance is by running all of our electric vehicles. We run about 290 BEVs and PHEVs, and we have about 190 chargers throughout the city. And we were the Smart City recipient in 2016, and received an award from the DOE and Vulcan for $50 million. And so we put that money to good use by purchasing a lot of infrastructure and purchasing vehicles. So you say, well, geez, Kelly, what has electric vehicles done for you? Really, what has it done for you? So you see it here in hard numbers. Again, and remember, I'm taking you to 60,000 feet. We've enjoyed cost avoidance of 366,313 gasoline gallons of petroleum since 2018, which means we reduced our carbon emissions by 3,236 metric tons. And what that and for those of us that don't really understand, well, what is a metric ton and how does that all work? And remember, folks, one of the biggest jobs that we have in the fleet business is educating, educating, educating. We have to educate our directors, we have to educate the administration, we have to educate our mayors, and this is part of the educational process. This is what you're getting for your money, guys and gals. This is like taking 773 gasoline powered vehicles off the road a year. Now, people get that. They get that. They don't necessarily get what is 3,000 metric tons of less carbon emissions. So when you say I'm going to take I've taken off through cost avoidance 773 gasoline powered vehicles. You know what? Comes with a punch. People understand that and know what that means. Let's go to the next slide, please. Remember, hang on, I got you at 60,000 feet. So you say, well, Columbus, you've got all these sustainability efforts, you've got all these programs, you got 100 vehicles with 100 mowers with propane, you're the largest propane user in the state of Ohio, you've won sustainability awards and everything else. What has that really done for you? Well, here it is in hard numbers. In 2010, we consumed 3.455 million petroleum gallons of fuel. Last year, we consumed 2.227 million gallons of petroleum fuel. That's a 34% reduction since 2010 in petroleum fuel. And let me tell you this, Columbus has grown, it's not shrunk. Fleet has grown, it's not shrunk. And our sustainability efforts have grown, it's not shrunk. So you see all of the parts and pieces, just like Rick was saying, you know, all of the things that he was discussing, those all play integral parts in delivering results like this. And I think it's important for us to be able to deliver the final results as managers, as administrators, and show them this is the impact that our sustainability program, that our data is having, our results are having, our actions are having on the results for our city fleet. And I leave you with one more final slide. If you'll go one more time for me, you say, well, what does that mean? I'll say, okay, Kelly, so you reduced 1.2 million gallons of fuel. We've reduced almost 12 metric tons of carbon emissions over the last 10 years. So that's like taking 2,550 vehicles off the road for 1 year. So it comes down to being able to communicate with your administration of what you have achieved and why you're achieving it. There's no one silver bullet. Electrification isn't the one silver bullet. CNG isn't the one silver bullet. Renewable propane isn't the one silver bullet. What we'd really like to be is carbon neutral by 2050. That's in our sustainability program. And that's going to be a challenge for us. And many of us know because electrification for mid-duty vehicles and heavy duty vehicles is challenging. It's just not there. It's still part of the learning curve. So when we look at benchmarking as a critical piece of what we do and how we compare to other fleets that are our size and aren't our size, but fleets that are operating in similar conditions that we have, snow and rain, cold weather. Minnesota, the state of Minnesota is part of this benchmark. And so we do this every year. We've done it for the last 10, 12 years, and it pays off in spades because it, in effect, tells our story. But to get to this, you got to have good data. And good data comes from your GPS, and it comes from a robust fleet management information system. With that being said, I'm not sure who's going to take you below the 60,000 feet, but I'm done for the day and sharing with you some of our accomplishments in the city of Columbus.
Thank you so much, Kelly. I really appreciate it. Part of my favorite aspect of these webinars is that we're hearing specifically from fleet managers and administrators on what they do, what their experience is. And again, thank you for sharing yours with us. I'm glad to introduce Tara Spencer as our next speaker. She has a distinguished 25-year career with Enterprise Fleet Management, where she served as managing director for Western New York and New England. In this executive role, she led a large sales team and managed complex service operations, focusing on customer satisfaction and operational efficiency. Tara's expertise spans fleet sales, vehicle total cost of ownership, and electric vehicle strategy, including emissions reduction. During her tenure, she oversaw 15,000 fleet vehicles and served hundreds of organizations, achieving significant growth milestones. After retiring from Enterprise, Tara joined Move EV as head of sales, where she helps organizations streamline EV transitions by eliminating cost barriers. Move EV provides a convenient reimbursement solution for EV charging, allowing drivers to charge at home without additional hardware. And that last topic is one that we hope to explore more in 2025. But for now, Tara, I hand it over to you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Shelley. And also a big thank you to Mary Beth for helping organizing this today. It is quite a feat to come after Megan, Kelly, and Rick in this order. We have some industry heavyweights giving some fantastic advice today. I'm happy to be part of the panel. As Shelley mentioned, I've spent my entire career trying to help organizations improve efficiencies and reduce their cost of ownership. And I truly believe telematics is a game changer in this effort. And the reporting and the data that Kelly and Rick were able to share today are just leaps and bounds ahead of where we were a decade ago. So it's very exciting. Next slide, please. So where you're high level looking at this 30,000 feet, 60,000 feet, I'm going to take you into the weeds a little bit and tell you a couple of stories and a couple of different examples in my background where telematics have been instrumental. And I agree with everything that you've heard so far. Telematics provide you an enormous amount of data, but that is just where you're getting started. You have to build insights from there per Megan, build stakeholders per Rick, and then benchmark yourself so you really know how it's going to impact your long-term success, as Kelly shared with us. So next slide, please. And you can pull up all 4 bullets on this slide. So I'll tell you a little bit about my experience working with telematics at Enterprise. I started becoming familiar with the abilities about 15 years ago. We implemented telematics devices really for route optimization, theft prevention. We move a ton of inventory around the country all the time. And we've been able to use telematics really to increase that routing, make sure that we're not losing vehicles. You'd be amazed how many vehicles we lost before we had telematics. More than a few. I personally lost one that I can tell you about some other time. But it was a game changer in terms of expense management for the rental company. Shortly after that, after we released our rent-a-truck division, we found out very quickly that running a medium-duty DOT type fleet is very expensive to maintain. I'm sure there's a lot of you out there that are dealing with that every single day. And we found that by putting telematics in those vehicles, and using that for engine diagnostics, we could do a much better job of pulling those off rent, getting them in for proactive maintenance, and getting them back out, and really avoiding some of those large ticket expenses that happen when you're not getting that diagnostic data. A few years later, on the fleet management side, we caught on to the benefit here, and we started becoming a reseller. So I taught my entire sales team all the facets of Geotab. That was our reseller partner. We put them in our own vehicles. I personally learned some of the benefits of the audible alerts. I became a better driver just myself, just from some of those benefits that came in a different area for us. And fast forward to today, or at least 2022, when I left Enterprise, they were knee deep in a nationwide survey on electric vehicle data with their telematics partner Geotab to really pull together one of the largest studies in the country on electric vehicles. So just so many different applications over the last 15 to 20 years of what telematics has been able to do to enhance visibility and controls in your fleet. Next slide, please. So at the very beginning, Shelley talked about the triple bottom line and defined it for us. And along the way, we've heard about a lot of the KPIs and a lot of the stakeholders and buy-in you're not going to need to get to really move your fleet towards a sustainable future and get that buy-in for a telematics program. And I'm not going to go through all these bullet points because we have talked about this, but I will just say, if we look at dispatching and routing, if you think about your people, the planet, and your profitability, or maybe staying within your budget for a more favorable term for a government organization, those three components have very different priorities. And so it's not just about knowing who your stakeholders are, but it's knowing what matters to them. So what, right? Why do they care about dispatching and routing? Because those three pegs are going to have very different priorities. Your people, right? You're caring about engagement, right? Culture, eat strategy for breakfast. You've heard that from time to time. So when you think about using telematics to improve dispatching and routing, you're effectively making the lives of your drivers better. You might get them an extra half hour at home in the morning. You might get them home a half hour earlier in the evening. You might be able to arrange their day so that they can get to their kids' soccer game. If you can position the benefits of telematics in a way that your people see the so what for them, then you're likely to engage more stakeholders. If you think about it from the planet's perspective, right? Sustainability, less impact, less waste. Efficiency and routing gives you all of that. Less wasted fuel, less wear on the vehicle. You'll have to replace them less often. All of those things are good for the planet. And then profitability. This is the obvious one, I think, that comes to mind with dispatching and routing. If you have a better system, you can get to more jobs, serve more customers, serve more clients, and essentially get more efficiency out of your drivers. So just understanding what your stakeholders want and making sure that you align the KPI and what the KPI does for them with the stakeholder, I think, is critically important. Next slide. So at the beginning, you saw in my intro slide, TCO advocate, and I am. And one of the major challenges that I see in moving towards a more sustainable future for fleet vehicles is there seems to be a little bit of a gap between, hey, I've got this sustainability goal, and then I've got what I can afford. And for some reason, when it comes to EVs and alternative fuel vehicles, those aren't always in alignment. And I would argue that they need to be long-term. And so this is an example of a conventional vehicle on the left, a pie chart of all the expenses you should expect, an electric vehicle on the right, a pie chart of all the expenses you should expect. And the question becomes, which one has a higher total cost of ownership? And from this pie chart, you can't tell. And I'll also point out that the largest expense shifts very much from one to the other, right? So depreciation is overwhelmingly the largest expense with an electric vehicle, whereas with an ICE, it's about on par with fuel. So if you're trying to convince stakeholders that sustainability aligns with your bottom line, you have to have a really good handle on all of your components of costs. And telematics is an excellent way to give you the data to do that, especially in government organizations where capital budgets and operating budgets can come from two different pools. Knowing this information and being able to tie it together is critical to gain support and traction in your budget. Nice slide, or next slide, sorry. I was reading that comment and I said nice. So I have two quick examples to share with you as I wrap up. These are examples of municipalities that have adopted our solution and a telematics-based data system to really help them expedite their electric vehicle transition. So we just started a pilot program with the state of Massachusetts. They've got a ton of light-duty vehicles across the state. About 20% of them are take-home eligible based on job application, all of that. Today, they have 350 that are electric, and they are using Geotab. Their goal is to get 50% zero emission in the next 10 years. And the problem that they were facing is that they have an overwhelming need to add infrastructure. They don't necessarily have the funding to do it. They don't necessarily have the real estate to do it. And the grid support, a grid enhancement, is going to be very pricey. So they've identified that we can help them support vehicles that go home by allowing them to plug into drivers' houses. They don't have to spend the infrastructure and they can reimburse those drivers. When we first rolled this program out, one of the state officials said to me that he thinks this approach will save them tens of millions of dollars long term because they will require less infrastructure if they can send the right EVs home with drivers, and those drivers are comfortable that they'll get reimbursed. Last slide, or second to last slide. Second example I'll share is the city of Seattle. I think this is a common occurrence for cities across the country today. They've got aggressive EV goals. They've got 4,000 light duty vehicles across the city. They have over 50 workplace charging hubs and 275 EVs, and they are using telematics to track them. The problem that they had is that their utility provides carbon credits for clean energy distribution, and Seattle could become eligible for all these credits if they could validate that they were providing clean energy in their fleets. But they had a hodgepodge of chargers. They were one of the very early adopters of workplace charging, and so they have some very old non-networked chargers. They have some newer ones that aren't networked anymore. And then they have a new EVSE partner that's going to be a third and totally new charging network. And so because some of their chargers were no longer sending data or were not smart chargers, they weren't able to capture the credits. So what we did for them is we took that same software solution and we geofenced all of their hubs with Geotab, and we're able to account for their workplace charging with a telematics-based system instead of a hardware-based system. So it's allowing them to kind of grow and extend the life of some of their hardware without having to spend their money on new infrastructure. So it can just make those electrification budgets a little bit more manageable for you as you try to expand. And next slide. Here's my contact information. I love to talk about TCO. It's definitely one of my passions. So happy to be here today and happy to answer any questions that might come up. Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you, Tara. I appreciate it. And thank you for sharing your experience, both with Enterprise and with Move EV. That's great. At this time, I would like to ask all of our speakers to rejoin us, as well as Megan Allen from Geotab, and we will start the Q&A portion of today's session. And I have been tracking some items as they come through, both in chat and Q&A. Rick, I think there's one you may be able to knock out really quickly. Joe Clark wants to know, who is the city of Raleigh sourcing their renewable diesel from?
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. And I know we're running out of time, so I'll just be blunt. We are getting it from Mansfield Oil. And Joe, you're our neighbor city, so feel free to reach out to me anytime. You have my contact information. We'll be happy to share more information.
I didn't want to assume it was Joe Clark from Durham, but
yeah, well,
thanks for joining us, Joe. Another question that I had, when you are setting your KPIs originally or during evolution of your KPIs, who are the stakeholders that you all brought in?
And who is that question aimed towards? Is that me or
to the group?
Okay. I'll start. Our stakeholders, we refer to stakeholders as our customers, right? For lack of a better word, for creating a fancy term. So our stakeholders are everybody from our customers to city administration.
Anyone else have others you'd like to add? Okay, then. We've got questions coming in about charging, and one is hearing more about geofencing with city-owned charging, and I think that could also be combined with how do you handle charging with shared vehicles?
I'll touch on that a little bit because I think we have a unique philosophy, right? And I think it's a human behavioral type of change, is that there's this notion that I think citywide that there's going to be a charger for every vehicle, right? And to Tara's point, right, we don't necessarily believe that. We think we need about 500 dual port chargers, 50 DC fast chargers, take home charging, and as well as third party charging, right? We're not envisioning we're going to invest in every charger for every vehicle as a 1-to-1 ratio. It's really not affordable. And to Kelly's point, right, I think you really need to look at the data and see if it's financially sustainable, right? We're looking at more of a 4-to-1 ratio of chargers to vehicles, but more importantly is really how a vehicle charges and how fast it charges is really important. So what we're doing is we're doing two things: is we're building park and rides where vehicles can be brought in from home and parked overnight, and then when they're deployed, those chargers then become available to the public, right? So it's kind of a combination hybrid. And then two is building fuel hubs. So to Kelly's point, right, we have a variety of alternative fuels that we're using. So our analogy is, why not build DC fast chargers at those fuel sites? We have 7 fuel sites throughout the city. There's not a fuel site at every building. Those vehicles go to those fuel sites, they get fuel. So if we can build DC fast chargers at those fuel sites, they go there whether they get compressed natural gas, renewable diesel, renewable propane, whether they get E85, they go to that same site and they get their charging at those sites. And if they have to wait there 5 minutes, just like they have to wait there 3 minutes to get fuel, it's bridge technology, right? They don't need to get a full charge. You know, if you look at the EV infrastructure industry, nobody suggests that you charge from 80% to 100% because it creates more energy. It causes more energy to go from 80 to 100 than it does from 0 to 75. So our analogy is to have them come to the fuel sites as hubs and not have a charging at every single parking stall, because quite frankly, it's unaffordable and it's just not doable. Most of our city buildings cannot support the load for charging in each and every building. So I think I may have just rambled, so I'm just going to shut up and leave some other comments to some of our other colleagues.
To your point, Rick, you make an excellent point. We, on the other hand, put a level 2 charger in for every vehicle. We have 190 chargers behind the fence. I think, Tara, you're probably going to have the best. I mean, the Electrification Coalition recommends 3 vehicles per charger. So I think you're about on it, Rick. And I don't know, Tara, you may have a better data point than that. But that's not the way we do it. I'm embarrassed to say that's not the way we do it here at the City of Columbus. We've designated a level 2 for each vehicle. And you're right, to your point, Rick, no, it's not very efficient. But we're dealing with city workers, and sometimes we don't always have the strongest minds out there operating to complete their duties and their tasks. So in an effort to make sure that we meet the mission of every division that's following an electric vehicle, we have provided a level 2 charger and continue to expand our level 2 chargers. Tara, is that a good number? 3 vehicles per charger?
It's a really good question. I will not claim to know the answer, but I will tell you an example of kind of what I'm seeing, right? So Seattle, when they adopted our solution, what we found was that some chargers were heavily used and some were not used at all. And we also found that a lot of drivers weren't charging at any of them. They were just going somewhere else. So to me, the first step is, if you can employ telematics to track all your charging data, you're going to assemble a whole lot of information, and that's going to help you build out additional infrastructure. The other thing I just would want to say on the pool piece, the pool vehicle piece, we get this a lot. And specifically when it comes to like a take-home vehicle fleet, where maybe it's a pool fleet, like fairly light usage, right? Maybe it's not permanently assigned to someone, but you could potentially charge it at home. When you have a telematics-based solution, it doesn't matter what vehicle that driver takes home and plugs into the charger, because all of it is VIN verified. So if you have a reimbursement solution and you have a supervisor and he wants to take a different truck every single night and charge it, you could reimburse that driver for all of those events in one receipt with our solution. But ultimately, any telematics-based approach is going to do that VIN verification for you and allow you to have more flexibility with a pool fleet.
Thank you. Kelly, I think this one may be for you. How do you choose who to benchmark against?
Well, I don't have to. We're under contract with Utilimark. Utilimark is a well-known benchmarker out there in the industry. and they roll up about 50 to 100 entities across the US, and they're indiscriminate about it. So we're looking at comparative analytics with the state of Minnesota, the city of LA, the city of New York, Chicago, counties. I mean, I'm not sure, it might be more than 100, but I've been under contract with Utilimark for the last 10 years. This isn't a pitch for Utilimark. I'm just saying we use them as a benchmarking because, frankly, if we had to go collect that data and do it on our own, it'd take me 2 or 3 people to keep up with that full time. There's no way you can, because it's just like, data for us in fleet has been like, if you can imagine a 5-inch fire hose, turn it on full and put it on your mouth and try to drink it. There's no way you're going to be able to drink it all in. And that's how much data we have coming at us through our telematics, through our FMIS, through everything we're doing. So we've got to be able to select the best data and use that data to enhance and make our fleets more efficient and more fuel efficient.
Excellent.
I'm not sure if I answered the question.
You did to me. So Megan, I think this question will kick off with you and then see if anybody has anything to add. With your clients who perhaps have lower budgets, what are the KPIs and telematics measurements you see them coming forward with first?
Yeah, so I think it really depends upon kind of what mandates that they are grappling with. So I think some of the times, and really, to start with electrification, because I don't want to think of electrification as something that is always a higher budget thing. So, with the EVSA, it's something that I personally, have been working on or delivering for 10 years. And so we were talking about a time where EVs were very, very expensive, but still it's like, if we presented them to the fleet and we made sure that we focused on that total cost of ownership component, some of the fleets we talked to weren't interested in electrification, but would come out of it saying, well, now I'd have to make a case not to get these. And it's not in the whole fleet. And I think that that's the really important thing is, you can't paint with a broad brush one of these strategies. Specifically to electrification, you can almost be surgical in saying, like, this is an EV, like this is a duty cycle. This is a vehicle today that if we replace it with an EV, it's going to make a big difference for our budget in a positive way. I think a lot of times as well, if we think about low cost to start programs, those are idling programs and just keeping track of what's going on and who's idling. I think one of those things is we can look at idling across the whole fleet, but what we started to hear is that it's important to drill down into particular groups. So, if you've got groups or departments or even regions where you might see a little bit more idling, that lets you focus, as opposed to almost, again, that broad brush of just saying, oh, we're going to try to reduce idling across the whole fleet. Reducing in an area where somebody is idling quite a bit, I often think about, if you take people's idle percentage from like 40% down to 10%, that's way better than taking someone's from 10% to 8%. It's not to say that there's nothing good with the 10 to 8%, but there's huge gains in 40 to 10%. And if that's possible in the fleet, I think that's a great area to start.
If I could follow up on your point, Megan, you make an excellent point. And unfortunately, with the public sector, what we do from a sustainability point won't always pencil. Confirm me on that, Rick. I know through several studies that the Fisher School of Business, Ohio State University, has done on our electrification fleet. More often than not, it has not penciled. But it's the right thing to do from a sustainability standpoint. And if we're going to be the pioneer here in the Midwest to be driving this project, it starts right here. The buck stops with the city, putting infrastructure in, putting vehicles in. And the reason for that is because as a public entity, we have far fewer miles that we drive than the private sector. So it makes it very challenging for electric vehicles to really pencil, even do a 7, 8, 9, 10, 11-year life cycle. Based on the analysis I've seen out of the Fisher School for Business, more often than not, my electric vehicles, all 290 of them, do not pencil. So, but they still play a role in reducing our carbon emissions. They still play a vital role in our cost avoidance, as I had shared with the group, through our reduced petroleum, or our avoided gallons of petroleum fuel, and our savings in carbon emissions. So they still contribute in a very, very significant way.
Yeah, I'll just go on the record to say I think it's a combination of both. I think we need to be good stewards. I do think it does pencil out. It's probably a little longer ROI if you take the total cost of ownership and you include infrastructure, right? But there is grant money, CFI, and other funding that can augment that. But I do think there is a pencil of that cost. And I think there is also a good stewardship of your community to embrace this technology. I will say, don't get me on the conversation of idle reduction, Megan, because I 100% agree with you, right? We did a comprehensive study, and what I think gets missed in the idling perspective is that not only does it reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it extends the life, or it, depending on how you look at it, can shorten the life of replacement because what's on the odometer reading on the dash is not really what's on the actual vehicle. And that means shorter life cycle of the vehicle. That means more fuel consumption and a host of other factors that I think we miss when those vehicles probably should be replaced earlier than they should. So you're shortening the life of the vehicle. So idle reduction is probably a great way of reducing without having to even deploy any technology. But that's a whole nother webinar and a whole nother discussion for another day.
Yeah, I'll add 2 cents as we wrap up. See, it was about where do you start? And I'll just say I worked in a sales fleet organization and we started with driver alerts and safety. So I think sometimes it's dependent upon how you use the fleet. You know, what are you struggling with? And those might be your earliest KPIs to start looking at. I always used to have to call my salespeople and be like, hey, did you crash into something? Because I just got an alert. And that wasn't always the best call, which leads me to my second point, which is when you're early on trying to get driver adoption and gain traction, catching them doing something right is a home run, right? So telematics allow you to get some vision into things, some transparency. And if you first start with the hammer, it can really hurt your traction. So starting early on with some recognition, some people who are really doing a nice job with it can really help them feel good about what you're looking for. And the last thing I wanted to say just on TCO is, because I heard this actually from a city this morning on a call, they see their EV transition and their cost of ownership opportunity more in downtime than anything else. They said no more oil changes, you know, far less maintenance. My vehicles are just not in the shop as often. And I often hear that that's as valuable as savings on the repairs themselves.
Thank you. I saw Patrick ask the question and Rick answered it in chat, but those won't show up in the recording. So the question was, for the car share program, did the city of Raleigh partner with a vendor or create that system internally? And the response is that RideCell is the motor pool application that Raleigh is using, and they are a Geotab marketplace partner. And we have 2 minutes left. I think, Tara, this may be for you. Do we know if there are any government entities who have successfully implemented automated reimbursement processes for at-home charging?
I suppose I would say yes, because they would be my customers. So that is what we do. We outsource and automate home charging reimbursement, and we handle payment processing too, if that's something that could be helpful. But yes.
Okay. And then 2 questions remain. Were there equity considerations in developing your KPIs, either internally or to external stakeholders?
I will say in our study with ICF, that was part of the study in making sure there was equity across the community so that there was charging. And it's probably a different initiative than it is for fleet charging, but it certainly is equity within the public facing charging aspect of it to make sure that all economically disparate and other community parts of the city have access to charging as well.
And final question, was it necessary to get EV specific training for techs, or do you have maintenance on battery systems done outside?
No, I'll share with you what we did because I've been asked that question at a number of presentations. We partnered with Columbus State, who's a part of MEMA, and they sought a federal grant to put together a 2-year EV training program, and it was fully grant funded. And we put 14 of our techs through that, and they received college credits. They did it during the day. They were taken off of wrench time, and they learned how to handle, how to PM EVs, BEVs, and PHEVs, because you don't just start working on these vehicles without having appropriate training and certifications. Otherwise, you'll kill somebody. So the answer is you have to make your own training program and partner with the local community college, partner with CAR, the Center for Automotive Research with OSU, partner with your local college to secure a grant for academics and get that academic training for the trainees for the techs that they need on the floor.
Excellent.
And I just say ditto to that, Shelley, because I know we're out of time.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, to our panelists, to our sponsors, to those of you that tuned in. It was a very action-packed 91 minutes, and we really couldn't do this without you all and our sponsors. And I hope that I will see you at NAFA in April, and then again at the Clean Energy Technology Center's SFT conference in August. And don't forget, December, we have off-road electrification. So thank you all again, and I hope you have a great afternoon.